Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel General Hospital today. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The shocking events surrounding Drew Cain's untimely shooting have left Port Charles reeling, and the aftermath only grows more complicated as the truth about his shooter and his heirs comes to light during his memorial service. For many characters on General Hospital, Drew's sudden death is not only a devastating loss, but also a revelation that threatens to upend lives and relationships across the canvas. The memorial service, which should have been a solemn gathering to honor Drew's heroism and tragic end, quickly turns into a jaw-dropping spectacle filled with secrets, accusations, and explosive truths that no one in the audience could have seen coming. The shooter's identity being made public during such a sacred moment shifts the atmosphere from grief to outrage, and the unveiling of Drew's heirs only adds fuel to the already blazing fire of drama. For those who loved him and those who wronged him, the service becomes a turning point that will ripple through the storylines for months to come. As friends, family, and enemies gathered at the church, the mood was thick with sorrow. Drew was not just a decorated Navy SEAL and a man who had sacrificed so much of his life for others. He was also a father, a brother, and a man who had struggled to reclaim his own identity after years of memory loss and manipulation. His death felt particularly cruel, given how far he had come in recent years to rebuild his life and relationships. Sam, who once loved Drew deeply, held her emotions in check as she comforted Scout, their daughter, trying to balance her grief with her duty to remain strong for her child. Curtis, Drew's closest friend, was nearly inconsolable as he gave the eulogy, speaking of Drew's unwavering loyalty and bravery, his sacrifices for family, and his determination to always do the right thing no matter the cost. The crowd listened intently, hearts heavy, until the shocking revelations began to unfold. The first bombshell dropped when a mysterious figure interrupted the service, announcing that the truth about Drew's shooter could no longer be hidden. Gasps filled the room as the name was revealed, and jaws dropped when it turned out to be someone no one in Port Charles had suspected. Whispers and disbelief echoed through the mourners, as the accusation pointed directly at a person who had ties to multiple powerful families in town. Suddenly, the grief in the room was replaced by outrage, as people struggled to comprehend how someone within their own circle could have pulled the trigger that ended Drew's life. Questions poured in immediately. Was it intentional? Was it a setup? Or was it a tragic accident? For those who had believed Drew's shooting was the work of an outsider or a faceless enemy, the truth was almost too much to process. Even as chaos erupted over the shooter's identity, another revelation brought the entire memorial service to a standstill. A lawyer stepped forward with documents, prepared to read Drew's will in accordance with his wishes. Though many thought this moment would come later, perhaps in private with family members, Drew had apparently left instructions that his heirs be made public immediately, ensuring transparency and avoiding any further secrets. The reading was filled with both expected names and shocking additions, as people learned who Drew considered part of his legacy. Of course, his daughter Scout was the primary heir, as expected, and her future was secured through trust funds and properties that Drew had carefully arranged. But beyond Scout, there were other names, individuals who had never been publicly acknowledged as beneficiaries of Drew's estate. One name in particular sent shockwaves through the crowd, suggesting that Drew may have fathered a child no one in Port Charles had ever known about. This revelation left Sam stunned, her emotions swirling as she tried to reconcile her grief with the possibility that Drew had been keeping secrets even from her. Curtis, who thought he knew everything about his best friend, was equally shaken by the idea that Drew may have had a hidden heir. The whispers grew louder as speculation ran rampant. Was this child truly Drew's, or was it an elaborate scheme by someone hoping to profit off his death? The lawyer maintained that the documentation was legitimate, but in Port Charles, nothing is ever that simple. The appearance of a new heir has the potential to stir up battles for inheritance, emotional turmoil for Drew's loved ones, and dangerous rivalries with those who want to stake their claim. For those already grappling with the identity of Drew's shooter, the announcement of his heirs only deepened the sense of betrayal and confusion. Elizabeth, who had shared a unique bond with Drew during his time in Port Charles, looked stricken as she processed the revelations. Carly, who had leaned on Drew in recent months and had formed a deep friendship with him, was equally rattled, her protective instincts kicking in as she immediately worried about how Scout would be affected by this storm of revelations. The crowd was buzzing with tension, the sanctity of the memorial service completely overshadowed by the shocking news. What makes the moment even more powerful is how it ties Drew's legacy to the larger canvas of General Hospital. His death, already a tragic blow, becomes the catalyst for stories that intertwine families, resurrect old feuds, and spark new mysteries. Who really pulled the trigger and why? Will the shooter face justice, or will powerful connections and secrets shield them from consequences? What about the new heir? Will they arrive in Port Charles? And if so, how will their presence change the dynamics of Drew's family and his daughter Scout's life? The answers promise to shake Port Charles to its core, leaving viewers on the edge of their seats as the story unfolds in the weeks ahead. The weight of the revelations at Drew's memorial service continued to ripple through every corner of the church, creating an atmosphere where grief collided with anger, disbelief, and suspicion. The shooter's name still hung in the air like an unhealed wound, drawing fierce whispers among the mourners as they tried to reconcile what they had just heard. For some, the revelation felt like betrayal at the deepest level, a shocking reminder that trust is often misplaced in Port Charles. For others, the announcement confirmed lingering suspicions that Drew's shooting was not a random act of violence, but a calculated strike designed to silence him permanently. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, torn between respecting the sanctity of the memorial and demanding immediate answers. Eyes darted toward the accused shooter, whose face registered both guilt and defiance, leaving everyone wondering if the truth had finally come out, or if another layer of deception had just been laid bare. Curtis, whose emotions were already raw from giving the eulogy, could no longer contain his fury. Standing up in the middle of the congregation, he confronted the shooter head-on, his voice trembling with rage as he demanded an explanation. Curtis reminded everyone that Drew had risked his life countless times for the sake of others, only to be cut down by someone who should have had no reason to harm him. His words echoed through the church, igniting a firestorm of reactions. Some attendees supported Curtis's outrage, nodding in agreement, while others looked uneasy, aware that public confrontations often lead to more questions than answers. The tension became so thick that even the officiant seemed powerless to regain control of the service. Sam, who had been silently struggling to keep herself composed, broke down at this moment, unable to bear the thought that Drew's life had been taken by someone within their orbit. Her tears fell freely as she clutched Scout close, whispering reassurances even as her own heart fractured. Scout, too young to fully comprehend the chaos, clung to her mother, sensing the fear and sadness that surrounded them. For Sam, the pain was twofold: losing Drew and now learning that his death was tied to betrayal. She found herself torn between her maternal instinct to shield Scout from the drama and her personal need to uncover every last detail about why Drew had been targeted. The service, which should have been about closure, instead reopened old wounds and created new ones that would take a long time to heal. While the revelation of the shooter's identity electrified the room, the subsequent unveiling of Drew's heirs sent shockwaves that rivaled the first. The lawyer, committed to fulfilling Drew's wishes, pressed forward with the reading despite the mounting chaos. He laid out Drew's intentions clearly. His estate was to be divided among individuals he had named long before his death, with Scout receiving the largest share to secure her future. While no one was surprised by Drew's provision for his daughter, the additional names on the list sparked gasps and murmurs that reverberated throughout the pews. One of those names was Jake Weber, Elizabeth's son with Jason Morgan. Though not Drew's biological child, Drew had always maintained a strong bond with Jake, treating him as family. The decision to include Jake as an heir highlighted Drew's enduring respect for Jason's family and his acknowledgement of the role he had once played in their lives. Elizabeth was visibly moved by this gesture, tears welling in her eyes as she realized just how deeply Drew's love extended. This choice reignited old conversations about Drew's complex history with Jason and how their identities had once been intertwined, blurring the lines between blood and chosen family. But it was the final name on the list that caused the most disruption. The lawyer read it slowly, deliberately, ensuring there could be no mistake. It belonged to someone previously unknown to most of Port Charles, an alleged child from Drew's past that no one had ever heard about. The reaction was instantaneous. Gasps, whispers, and outright denials rang out as the implications settled in. Could Drew truly have another child out there, one whose existence he had never revealed even to his closest friends? If true, this revelation would alter the landscape of his legacy entirely, Not just for Scout but for everyone connected to him. The mysterious heir's name alone raised 1,000 questions. Who was the child's mother? Did Drew know about them, or had he been kept in the dark? If he did know, why had he chosen to conceal their existence? And what role would this person play now that they had been thrust into the spotlight of Port Charles drama? Some speculated that the heir might be a pawn in a larger scheme, someone using fabricated documents to secure a claim on Drew's fortune. Others believed the heir could be the real deal, another innocent victim caught up in the machinations of adults who had kept secrets for far too long. For Carly, who had leaned heavily on Drew in the months before his death, this revelation stung in ways she didn't expect. She had grown to trust Drew implicitly, valuing his honesty and friendship. To discover that he may have had a secret heir left her questioning whether she had truly known him at all. Her face betrayed her shock, and though she remained silent, her mind was already racing with the possibilities of how this new development could reshape the lives of those closest to her. The atmosphere inside the church had shifted from grief to suspicion, each new revelation fueling speculation and distrust. The mourners no longer seemed united in mourning Drew's loss, but divided over what to believe and how to process the bombshells dropped before them. In the midst of the confusion, questions about Drew's shooter continued to resurface. Did the person responsible for his death act to silence him before he could reveal the truth about his heirs? Was the murder connected to inheritance disputes, or was it a separate crime altogether? These unanswered questions added layers of complexity to an already tangled web of intrigue, making it clear that Drew's story was far from over. What was meant to be a respectful farewell had devolved into an explosive event that left more questions than answers. Those closest to Drew found themselves facing a new reality. His death had not only robbed them of a friend, father, and ally but had also unearthed secrets that threatened to tear them apart. In Port Charles, nothing ever stays buried for long, and Drew's memorial had just proven that even in death, his presence would continue to influence the lives of everyone around him. The aftermath of the memorial service grew more volatile by the minute as attendees tried to process the cascade of revelations. The air inside the church felt thick, as if every word spoken carried the potential to ignite another explosion. The combination of grief and suspicion created a dangerous cocktail, one that no amount of comforting hymns or whispered prayers could ease. Drew's memory, which should have been celebrated in peace, became overshadowed by the shocking dual revelations of his killer's identity and the existence of an heir no one knew about. The mourners, once bound together in sorrow, now seemed fractured, divided by disbelief, anger, and fear of what would come next. Anna Devane, always the investigator even when off duty, quietly excused herself from her seat and made her way toward the back of the church. Her sharp mind had already begun piecing together the implications of what had been said. If the shooter's identity was genuine, then motives needed to be examined, timelines verified, and potential accomplices considered. Anna knew better than anyone that in Port Charles, one revelation rarely told the full story. For her, the memorial service had transformed into a crime scene of sorts, not in a literal sense but in the sense that every whispered word and every reaction could be a clue to the larger truth. Jordan Ashford was equally disturbed. As former police commissioner, she couldn't ignore the chaos unfolding before her eyes. She exchanged a look with Anna, both women silently acknowledging the need for answers. The accused shooter, sitting stiffly in their pew with whispers swirling all around them, looked increasingly cornered. But Jordan knew better than to leap to conclusions. In her experience, public accusations often masked deeper secrets, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Drew's murder was tied to something bigger. Perhaps corporate rivalries, secret missions from Drew's Navy past, or even lingering vendettas from Port Charles villains who had never truly disappeared. Meanwhile, Curtis was still seething. His grief made him impatient for justice, and he had no intention of letting the accused shooter walk out of the church unchallenged. But Stella Henry placed a firm hand on his shoulder, urging him to find strength in Drew's memory rather than give in to rage. Stella reminded him that Drew valued loyalty, truth, and patience, qualities Curtis would need if he hoped to see justice served. Curtis reluctantly sat down, his chest heaving with barely contained fury, but the fire in his eyes made it clear that he would not rest until the full truth was revealed. The conversation soon turned back to the matter of Drew's heirs. The lawyer, who had clearly anticipated some backlash, stood firm in his delivery of the will's contents. He reiterated that Drew had been meticulous about ensuring his wishes were followed, leaving no ambiguity in his documents. Still, that did little to calm the storm brewing in the room. The mention of an unknown heir had already set Port Charles ablaze with speculation, and every person present was quietly forming their own theory. Elizabeth, struggling to contain her emotions, reached for Jake's hand, squeezing it gently as she tried to comfort him. Though Drew's decision to leave something for Jake was a touching gesture, it also brought up memories of a time when Drew's identity had been entangled with Jason's. Elizabeth couldn't help but wonder how Jason himself would feel upon learning that Drew had considered Jake a part of his legacy. Would Jason see it as an act of kindness, or would he view it as an intrusion into his role as Jake's father? Elizabeth prayed that the gesture would be seen for what it was, a reflection of Drew's big heart, and his refusal to let the past erase the bonds he had built. Carly, however, was more skeptical. She leaned over to whisper to Sunny, her voice low but filled with urgency. She questioned whether the mysterious heir might have been fabricated, possibly by enemies looking to dismantle Drew's estate from the inside. Sunny listened carefully, his sharp instincts alert. He didn't dismiss Carly's concerns, especially given how often forged documents and hidden identities had rocked Port Charles in the past. To Sunny, every new revelation was another potential threat to those he loved, and he quietly vowed to get to the bottom of it before it could spiral further out of control. Sam remained quiet, her focus still on Scout, but inside she was a whirlwind of emotions. Hearing Drew's will read aloud made her realize just how much thought he had put into securing their daughter's future, even if he had not shared every detail of his plans with her. At the same time, the possibility of another heir shook her to the core. She couldn't help but wonder whether Drew had known about this child during their time together, and if so, why he hadn't trusted her with the truth. The uncertainty gnawed at her, deepening her grief into something sharper, an ache of betrayal mixed with sorrow. The drama reached another peak when a stranger in the back of the church stood up. Dressed in dark clothing, their face partially obscured by a hat, the figure hesitated before stepping into the aisle. The murmurs grew louder, spreading like wildfire through the congregation. Everyone turned to look, tension crackling in the air. The stranger slowly removed the hat, revealing themselves to be a young adult whose features bore a striking resemblance to Drew's. Gasps echoed through the church as the lawyer confirmed what many had already suspected. This was the heir named in Drew's will. The revelation stunned the crowd. Some immediately questioned whether the resemblance was coincidental, while others were convinced that blood ties were undeniable. The young heir introduced themselves hesitantly, their voice shaking with emotion as they explained that they had only recently learned of their connection to Drew. According to them, Drew had reached out before his death, acknowledging their existence and promising to build a relationship. But his shooting had cut those plans short, leaving them with only fragmented conversations and unanswered questions. For Scout, though too young to fully comprehend, this moment would alter her life forever. Sam instinctively pulled her daughter closer, torn between wanting to protect her from potential heartache and recognizing that this stranger could, in fact, be Scout's sibling. The idea of her daughter sharing Drew with another child, someone who had lived an entirely different life, was overwhelming. Sam's protective instincts warred with her innate compassion, leaving her unsure of how to move forward. The church buzzed with speculation as the young heir continued speaking, but their words only raised more questions. They claimed to have proof of Drew's acknowledgement, including letters and legal documents signed by him. Carly shot Sunny a pointed look, silently questioning whether these documents could be authentic. Anna and Jordan exchanged glances, silently agreeing that this development warranted further investigation. The possibility of fraud could not be ignored, but neither could the emotional weight of the stranger's story. The memorial, meant to honor Drew, had now fully transformed into a courtroom of public opinion. Grief had given way to suspicion, and sympathy was replaced with scrutiny. As the service came to a close, the people of Port Charles left the church with more questions than answers. Who truly pulled the trigger that ended Drew's life? Was the new heir legitimate, or part of a larger scheme? And most importantly, how would these revelations shape the future for Scout, Sam, Curtis, and everyone else connected to Drew Kane's legacy? The church emptied slowly, the heavy silence broken only by the low hum of speculation and muffled sobs. What should have been a unifying farewell had instead created deep fractures among Drew's loved ones and acquaintances. Outside, the crisp Port Charles air felt charged, almost electric, as people gathered in small clusters to dissect every detail of what they had just witnessed. The identity of Drew's shooter, the revelation of an unknown heir, and the sudden appearance of that heir in the flesh had turned the memorial into one of the most unforgettable and scandalous events in the town's history. Curtis lingered on the church steps, his expression a mixture of sorrow and fury. He replayed the moment the shooter's name was announced again and again in his mind, struggling to reconcile it with the person he thought he knew. How could someone so close, so familiar, be responsible for taking Drew's life? His grief made him impatient, and he felt a gnawing need for justice that could not wait. He turned to Jordan, urging her to investigate immediately, but Jordan, seasoned by years of police work, reminded him that rash action could do more harm than good. They would need evidence, motive, and clarity before moving forward. Curtis reluctantly agreed, but his clenched fists and tense jaw revealed he was ready to act the moment he sensed hesitation from the authorities. Meanwhile, Sam stood with Scout a few feet away, her eyes fixed on the young stranger who had stepped forward as Drew's heir. Sam's mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. She could not deny the resemblance. There was something in the stranger's eyes, the shape of the jawline, even the timbre of their voice that echoed Drew. But resemblance was not proof, and Sam had been burned too many times by imposters, con artists, and long-buried secrets to trust blindly. Her protective instincts screamed at her to shield Scout from this new person, yet another part of her, the part that had once loved Drew deeply, felt a responsibility to hear them out. After all, if Drew had acknowledged this child, then Sam owed it to him to at least listen. Carly, always sharp and pragmatic, pulled Sonny aside as soon as they were out of earshot of the others. She insisted that they could not take anything at face value. Drew's fortune, his connections, and even his memory made him a prime target for exploitation, and Carly worried that this so-called heir might be nothing more than a skilled manipulator with forged papers. Sonny, while cautious, reminded her that Port Charles had seen plenty of shocking truths revealed over the years. Things that once seemed impossible often turned out to be very real. Still, Sonny vowed to keep his guard up, promising Carly that they would dig deeper before allowing this newcomer into their inner circle. Inside the church, Anna had cornered the lawyer, demanding to see the documentation that confirmed the heir's legitimacy. The lawyer explained that Drew had personally updated his will months before his death, naming this individual explicitly as part of his estate distribution. Anna listened carefully, noting every detail, while Jordan joined her to scrutinize the papers. Though the documents appeared authentic at first glance, both women agreed they would need verification. In Port Charles, nothing was ever what it seemed, and it would not be the first time someone used falsified paperwork to manipulate a wealthy family. The heir, meanwhile, looked both overwhelmed and determined. They stood alone near the churchyard, their presence drawing curious glances and hushed conversations. Though visibly nervous, they seemed earnest, insisting that they had not come to claim riches but to honor Drew and the bond he had begun to form with them. They recounted their last exchanges with him, short but meaningful messages in which Drew expressed his desire to be part of their life. Hearing this, some attendees softened, but others remained skeptical, convinced the timing of their appearance was too convenient. Curtis eventually approached the newcomer, his voice steady but tinged with suspicion. He explained that Drew was more than just a friend to him. He was family, and anyone claiming to be part of Drew's legacy would need to prove their sincerity. The heir listened respectfully, assuring Curtis they wanted nothing more than to carry Drew's memory forward. Still, Curtis's watchful eyes revealed he would not be so easily convinced. In his heart he hoped the claim was true, but his instincts told him to be cautious until the truth was fully uncovered. Elizabeth, standing nearby with Jake, struggled to process her own feelings. Seeing Jake included in Drew's will had touched her deeply, but now she worried about what this revelation meant for her son. Would Jake's inheritance become entangled in legal disputes if the new heir's claim was contested? Would Jason, already protective of his children, feel threatened by Drew's decisions? Elizabeth knew Jason well enough to predict that this situation would not sit easily with him, and she braced herself for difficult conversations ahead. The shooter, who had sat stone-faced through most of the service, was now under intense scrutiny. Though whispers had named them, no official arrest had been made, and that uncertainty left the crowd restless. Some demanded immediate justice, while others insisted the accusation might have been a setup. The accused, perhaps sensing the growing hostility, slipped out quietly, but not before locking eyes with Anna. The look they exchanged was chilling, part defiance, part warning, leaving Anna more convinced than ever that the truth was far murkier than it appeared. Back at the Corinthos compound later that evening, Carly replayed the events to Sunny, her worry evident. She couldn't shake the feeling that Drew's death, the shooter's identity, and the sudden appearance of this heir were all connected. Sunny agreed, his instincts telling him that a larger conspiracy was at play. He speculated that Drew's past, particularly his time with the Navy and his involvement in dangerous missions, might have resurfaced to haunt him. Perhaps his death had less to do with personal betrayal and more to do with unfinished business from his secretive past. Carly, though unsettled, admitted that the theory made sense, and together they vowed to uncover the truth, not just for themselves but for Scout, who deserved answers about her father's legacy. As the sun set on Port Charles, the memorial service remained the town's only topic of conversation. The whispers traveled fast. Who was the mysterious heir? Could they be trusted? Was the shooter truly guilty? Or a scapegoat for someone more powerful pulling strings from the shadows? And perhaps the most pressing question of all, had Drew himself anticipated this chaos when he left such specific instructions in his will, or had he simply hoped his wishes would bring his loved ones together instead of tearing them apart?